Let's talk about implied odds. Hopefully that phrase sounds familiar. It conjures thoughts of pot odds, a topic we discussed in a previous video. The reason I say this is the two phrases are actually very related. Whereas pot odds compares the size of the current pot to a call you're facing, implied odds compares the eventual size of the pot to that same call you're currently facing. We would say some hands don't give you the explicit pot odds, but may, in your estimation about how much more money will go into the pot on later streets, those same hands may offer you implied odds. And because of this, if you're aware of implied odds, there's hands that you used to fold that now you think you're priced in to call. And this can make you a very threatening poker player. Let's look through a hand example to explain it more clearly. Let's say the blinds are 50 and 100. We're up against one opponent. He's got ace of clubs, king of hearts. We know his hand for educational purposes, and we have 8 of spades, 9 of spades. He raises pre-flop, we call. The flop comes out, 2 of spades, 10 of spades, 5 of clubs. He had bet 300 pre, we called 300, so the pot's 750. Let's say on this flop, he continues with a C bet of 500, we call it. The pot's now 1750. The turn brings an interesting card, the ace of hearts. We still have our flush draw, but our opponent now, he's got top pair, a pair of aces, he likes his hand, and maybe he sees the flush draw. He sticks in a pretty hefty bet, a pot-sized bet of 1750. We're faced with a difficult decision. We don't think he's on the flush draw, so if we hit our spade, we'll have the best hand. Do we call 1750? In our pot odds video, in our hand equity video, we taught you that you need to do some math to help you with this decision. First, you got to calculate your pot odds, which is the ratio of your call to the size of the pot after your call, which in this case would be 3 times 1750, 3 times our call, because there was a pot-sized bet, and a pot-sized call. So the math's pretty simple here, actually. Our pot odds are 33%, 1/3. Next, you need to calculate your equity, because you need to compare something to your pot odds. And our equity here is our outs divided by the unseen cards. Our outs are just the 9 spades. There's 44 unseen cards, so our equity comes out to 20%. Now, we've taught you previously that if your equity is less than your pot odds, you have to fold. You're only going to make money in situations where your equity is greater than your pot odds. So, considering our explicit pot odds, this is a fold. If, for instance, our opponent went all in by betting 1750, we can't win any more money in later streets to improve our implied odds. There's no extra money we can win, so it's an easy fold. But what if? What if our opponent had a stack of 5,000 chips behind? And we did too. We had 5,000 more chips. If you think that your opponent might put even a portion of these 5,000 chips on a spade river, maybe we would have what we call implied odds. Think about it. Our 1750 bet needs to be 20% of whatever the pot is on the river, so that our pot odds, our implied pot odds, equal that 20% equity we have. In other words, 1750 would need to be 1/5, 20% of the pot on the river. If you multiply both sides by 5, we get the pot on the river needs to be 5 times 1750. I'm going to leave it unmultiplied like that, and you'll see it'll make these calculations easier. The pot on the turn after we call is 3 times 1750. How do you get from 3 times 1750 on the turn to 5 times 1750 on the river? Well, somebody has to put in 2 times 1750. Simple math. That means either our opponent on, say, a 7 of spades river, he needs to either bet 2 times 1750 into us, or we need to bet that and he needs to make that call. Happens to be 3,500 chips into a pot of 5,250. We don't count the money that we either bet or call on the river because that's not profit. We're only interested in the potential profit we can add into our pot odd calculation. So he needs to bet 3,500 into a pot of 5,250 on the river for us to get that break-even implied odd compared to our 20% equity. The benchmark you should remember from this is if his turn bet is the size of the pot and we have a flush draw, his river bet has to be at least 2/3 of the pot. If we were to adjust these numbers a little bit, if his turn bet was 2/3 of the pot, the break-even river bet that we need to imagine he'll make 100% of the time is 1/2 the pot. He'll either need to make that or call it from us. If you lower this bet on the turn to 1/2 the pot, the river goes down dramatically to 1/5 the pot. And in our example, it's a little far-fetched that our opponent would call 2/3 size of the pot on the river. His bet on the turn of pot is suggestive that he sees the flush draw and he's trying to protect against it. So I don't really see him making such a huge call on the river. We would say that we don't have implied odds in this specific example. But what if he only bet 1/2 the pot on the turn? Then he only needs to call 1/5 the pot on the river, and that seems much more reasonable. If this were the case, we might say we have implied odds. So even though our equity on the turn, our pot odds on the turn were only 25% here, we see it as reasonable that 1/5 of the pot gets in on the river. So we would say, even though we don't have explicit pot odds on the turn, our equity of 20% is less than the 25% required. We would have implied odds. And the lesson here is, if your hand is obvious, if your draw is obvious, this is bad. Your opponent will notice this, and he's probably not going to get more money in later in the hand if you hit that perfect card. So the goal is to have disguised draws. Good draws to have would be gut shot straight draws, meaning you have an inside card to a straight. In our example, if you have 8-9 suited still, and say instead of a 5, this was a 6, so on the flop now, a 7 actually completes a straight. Your opponent is unlikely to imagine that you have 8-9 and you're looking for a 7. So your hand's hidden and you probably would have implied odds. Another good time to consider implied odds is when you have a turn redraw. Maybe for a flush. So you actually only had 3 cards to a flush on the flop. Let's say this 10 was some other suit. But this turn card was actually the ace of spades. So we call that a turn redraw, because whereas on the flop you were drawing to a straight, now you're drawing to a straight and a flush. So if a spade comes out, let's say a spade other than that 7, your flush is pretty well hidden. Most opponents don't pay attention to backdoor draws. So in these situations, you also should consider your implied odds.